I've been through over 15 evictions because where I'm from, the inner city of Detroit, we're not taught about cash flow or passive income or any of that. Matter of fact, you have to work hard for your money. And so it was that mindset that I had to overcome.
Today's guest grew up poor in Detroit and realized that there was a better way, had the hustle and the grit to figure out how to make it work in real estate investing, and now he helps others do that as well with his no money method. Hello, everyone, and thanks for tuning in. We are recording this on New Year's Eve, and so it's a very special episode, the last one of 2025 for the Freedom Blueprint. I'm Adrienne Green, and today we're here with David Webb. Get ready for insights to help you scale, systemize, and create more freedom with your real estate investing. So, David, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having me.
I am excited to hear your story. And if we start at the beginning, my understanding is you have a journey that went from broke to building this multi-million-dollar portfolio, which can be pretty powerful. And what I'd like to dig into first is the specific moment or decision that shifted your mindset from survival to this wealth creation.
Well, I was in survival mode most of my life. I think I had periods where I was less than broke. So, I've been through over 15 evictions. I've had to live in a house where I couldn't get the utilities turned on, and I had to run extension cords from my car and do all of that. I just always continued to try to learn, real estate, because where I'm from, the inner city of Detroit, that's not taught to you there. We're not taught about cash flow or passive income or any of that. Matter of fact, we're taught the opposite. We're taught you have to work hard for your money. And so it was that mindset that I had to overcome. And it eroded little by little by little, but I was just determined. I was just determined to learn and know real estate. I just had an innate desire to be in real estate from a young guy. And I just learned through a lot of trial and error.
Well, I'm glad you did. It's obviously been transformational for you and for everybody you've touched. Now, I know a big part of your story is, you went, like you said, less than broke. Love that. You didn't have the capital. Now, most people believe you need capital to start investing. Why do so many smart, capable people remain trapped in that belief?
Well, that's that mindset that I had to overcome. And, I had done my first two real estate deals were no money or extremely low money. The first one was absolutely no money. And at closing, I walked away with money. I went in with absolutely nothing. I was broke, didn't have a job, didn't have credit. I bought a home, walked away with $10,000 in my pocket. And that was in the 90s. So 10,000 was actually some decent money. It was, it's different than today. And so I did two no money deals, but I still had that mindset that I had to have my credit right. I had to have my down payment. I had to have my taxes in order. And even after I had done two deals where I didn't need any of that, but it was that mindset that I was still trapped with. And that's just because, that's what we grow up knowing. That's what we just understand you have to have. And again, breaking that is the hardest part of this whole journey. The real estate, it's easy once you understand it and you believe it. It's the mindset's the hardest part.
Right. And you've hit on so many of, these limiting beliefs or these constructs we have that aren't necessarily reality. Like you've said about we've got to work hard for our money, right? We've got to have money to make more money. Credit is really important. You can't do anything without it. And the truth is, it's not always true. And often it's not, right?
Yeah. It's definitely not true. You don't have to. There's many ways to do it without all of that. And, and in real estate, because that's my area that, sure, there plays a role where credit and all that comes in as well. But it doesn't have to prevent you from entering. And even now, I still do deals where I don't use my own capital. Most of the time, my credit doesn't come to, doesn't even get pulled. So, even once you get successful with it, that's the way you're going to continue doing it.
Right. And that's the cool thing about real estate is there's so many paths that you can fall in or follow so you can do the one that works for you. Now, let's talk a little bit more about your no money method. Can you break down the essence of that, what it is and what it isn't?
Yeah, doing what I was doing and coming from where I come from, I know a lot of people who are still, where I'm from, friends of mine that are still struggling, still living paycheck to paycheck, still, coming into retirement and they're going to be on a fixed income. And so I coach them and I'm trying to help them and trying to help them break that mindset. And because a lot of them, even though they know what I'm doing, when I tell them, oh, you can do it, a lot of people think, no, that's just not for me. That's just for him. It's just not for me. It's so easy just to write that off because of the construct or the beliefs that we're so stuck with. And so, coaching them, helping them, I just said it's a no money method. You can just do it no matter what level you're at, because I help people with different things. I help people, they're in a position where they can't even really have a bank account. They've had bank accounts go upside down. They've lost their account, credit's bad, this or that. And so I just started saying, listen, I have a no money method. You can do this. And that's kind of where it took its, shape and, the name came from.
I love that. You found something that made it approachable to people who, again, have these limiting beliefs and these mindset issues where they think, like you said, it's not for me, right? Whether they think they're not worthy of it or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. A lot of people will see someone else doing it and just think, ah, yeah, it just won't work for me. It works for him. It just won't work for me. And, that's the part that I'm trying to help people overcome.
And that's the funny thing about real estate investing. I feel like you don't have to be that smart, that capable, that well connected. You don't have to start with money. Anybody can succeed in real estate investing.
Yeah, and most of your millionaires and almost all your billionaires, it's all from real estate. I mean, there's something to it.
I know a part of this no money method is some creative financing strategies, right? Other people's money, seller financing. For our listeners who maybe are unfamiliar with this, what would you say to them? Like, what's your wisdom for beginner investors on these different creative finance strategies?
That's how I work with people and I kind of help because everyone has going to have their own tailored area that they're going to be in. I have someone here that has worked with me, saw what I'm doing and applied it himself. He was in a position, he didn't have a down payment. He didn't have a good credit. He didn't have even his taxes. I don't even know if he had filed his taxes to even produce them. And he needed to move. And so he asked me, he said, do you have one of your properties that I could rent? And none of my properties was in an area that would have worked for him. So I was like, yeah, I mean, nothing I have is going to work for your situation. I said, but you can do this too. And so he was like, okay, well, let me see. And it was just that little push that he needed. And he started looking and he did. He found a seller finance deal. He was able to negotiate the upfront down payment by doing some handyman work. So he came out of pocket with no money. It was a triplex. 2 units were rented. One was vacant that he was going to move into. At closing, he collected rent from the downstairs too and was able to move in. So he went in with no money and collected rent at the day of closing. And so it just really
Love it.
depends on everybody's situation. Are you going to try to do a fix and flip, try to, build up some cash flow? Are you going to try to find an owner finance that you can move into? Just it really depends on the individual. And that's when I work with people, what we try to come down to. What is your area that we need to start with?
There are two things about that story, David, that I think speak to that mindset piece. The first is that this guy he was in a tough spot, right? And
Yeah,
so that's when people don't have any options is often when they're willing to get out of that comfort zone and try something new. That was the first one. And the second thing is he tried, right? And that's something I work to teach my kids all the time. We have these situations pop up where, for example, like I mentioned, we're in Vietnam, right? One of
right.
my kids loves to get the fresh coconuts to drink. When he does that, he likes after you drink it, if you can get it cracked open, you can eat the
Yeah,
coconut from inside.
right.
And
Yeah,
so we're always like, "Hey, go ask the vendor, the merchant, wherever we bought it from," right? Because often it's like a kiosk or something. It's not like you're in a restaurant, but we're like, "Go ask them if they'll cut it open for you." And he's like, "What if they say no?" And I'm like, "Well, then you're in the same place you are right now. You're no
right.
worse off." And that's
Yeah.
what I see in that story as well, is this person was willing to ask. And even if the answer is no, they're no worse off than they started. And yet the idea of somebody saying no to us can really scare us.
Yeah, definitely. We are afraid of no. And fortunately for me, I didn't go to college, so I didn't have an education path. I wasn't following a career. Coming out of Detroit, everyone gets into the auto industry. My father worked for Chrysler, my brother worked for Chrysler. I didn't want to do that. And I ended up getting into sales. And I had somebody who was teaching me, which was great. And it was all commission, so it was like just one step away from being an entrepreneur, so you don't make any money if you don't sell, and you learn to encounter no, and you learn to get past it, accept it, go on. Don't let that, stop you from continuing. And so I think it was very fortunate for me that I had that training early, because doing what I'm doing creative finance, just learning to be creative, You don't get stopped by no's or what some people would think's a closed door. You just learn to continue.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. Do you have any other stories along those lines? Or, you started with sales, you said that helped you get past these no's. If we've got listeners who are feeling like they're hitting a lot of closed doors, right, with trying to get
Yeah,
this creative financing, because that can happen, right? It can take a lot of no's
yeah,
to get to that yes. What
yeah.
would you recommend to them? What helps you when you're like in a lull where you really feel like, when is that next door going to open?
Yeah, I've early on my very first real estate deal, I walked into my father's home as a child, and that day I walked in, he said, "I'm selling the house," and I was like, "Oh man," he's like, "I want the home," and he laughed at me. He said, "How are you going to buy the house? You can't buy the house." And realistically, in most people's minds, I couldn't, and I didn't know. Luckily for me, I just didn't know better. I just was determined. I wanted to do it. I didn't know how. I just needed to figure it out. And so at that time, there was the Yellow Pages, and I picked up the Yellow Pages. I'm just calling lenders, and they're asking me all the standards. Do you have the down payment? Do you have good credit? And I was like, no. And so they're kind of like annoyed, laughing at me, like, "What are you even calling?" But I didn't stop for some reason. I didn't stop on the 3rd, I didn't stop on the 5th, and I probably went past, 8, 9, or 10. I just didn't stop, and I don't know why. I just needed to find someone that was gonna say something other, and I did. I found somebody that was into creative structures, and so he said, "Well, let's see." He said, "With every deal, you need certain pieces. Usually there's a down payment, usually there's a credit aspect, and so how you get these is where the creativity comes in." And so with this one, the guy said, "Okay, well, the down payment, what are we going to do?" Well, since it was my father's home, he was able to gift equity to me that then I was able to use as a down payment, covered the down payment. He said, "Okay, so now what about the credit? What can we do on the credit?" He said, "Can you partner with someone?" And this still happens today. I use people today still. I partner with deals. I use private money. So I'm
Mm,
like, "Okay, well, let me see." So I went to my brother and I said, "Hey, you want to help me buy dad's house?" And he was like, "Okay." And so he came on with the credit aspect. And my father at this time was selling the house for 80,000. But since my brother and I were buying it, he said, "Well, I'll sell it to you guys for 60." So we
wow.
agreed to continue with the lender to finance it at the 80. So at closing, my father got his 60, my brother and I got 20. We split it 10,000 each. So we went in with no money. Both of us went in with no money, walked away with 10,000 each. And that was just being, determined and just
Right.
trying to find and being open to creativity. That's one of the biggest parts, because if I'd accepted one of those no's, one, two, three, four down the line, I never would have found it. And so,
Right.
you just have to be determined and open to find another structures.
And I think something we've kind of hit on a little bit here is when you don't have a plan B, right? When you
Yeah.
have to make this happen or that opportunity's gone, like if your dad had sold your family home to someone else,
Yeah.
like what are the odds you would be able to buy it again in the future, right? We
Yeah,
just don't even
exactly.
know. And so when
Yeah.
it's like, I'm either going to make this work or my life is going to be entirely different, it's amazing how you can find a way to make it work, right?
Well, exactly. And with that being said, that's how the no money method began with me. Is that exact I wanted a property. I had to have this property. And I just was like, how am I going to do this? I had a property right down the street from it. And I saw this one come available, and I took everything that I had. It took everything I had to get that first one. I hadn't known the no money method yet. And so everything I had, it took to get my first one. And I was like, well, I don't know how I'm going to get to do this again. And that's when I'm like, okay, well, let's think about it. You need the pieces. What can you do? And at that point, I needed capital, and I didn't know anybody, and I didn't have friends or family that were well off that I could go to. And so I sat one day, my wife will say I didn't sleep for 3 days trying to figure this out, but, I was trying. I just was like, "What am I gonna do? I want this property." And so I thought, "Who might have the money that I know?" Now, these were people I came up with 3 people, but these were people that weren't even friends of mine. One was the person that previously owned the home I was living in. I just knew he was kinda well off, and we had a decent talking relationship. One was a gentleman that was at a store that I used to visit, and we talked and hit it off okay, but never were like friends or anything like that. And another guy was a contractor that I knew that had done some work on a property that I had. And so I sat there one day and I just sent a text and I said, "Would you be interested and hearing more about investing in a property I'm looking at. And that was it. That was just what I sent out. And I sat there so nervous. I was like, oh, what's going to happen? And the text came in, and all three of them said, yeah, I'd be open to hearing more. And I was like, oh, man, I couldn't believe it. I was like, wow. And so I ended up talking to all three of them, and one of them, it actually materialized, and we ended up getting the property, and it went on and on. But that's how it came out of that necessity.
If you're a real estate entrepreneur trying to scale while doing everything yourself, there's a better way. The Time and Freedom Starter Pack gives you the exact first steps to reclaim hours each week with real support, including what to hand off, where to start, and simple tools you can put into place right away. Download it for free at adriennegreen.com/starter pack. Now let's get back to the episode. And I love what you're sharing too there, David, with that story, because so often when people have that nervousness, right, they have these limiting beliefs like we've talked about. Every little story like this of someone else who powered through and had success is just like another example of what could be that helps break down those barriers and those limits.
Sure. And oh, I was nervous. I was like, wow. Because after that, I didn't know what could I do if they say no. And I just knew I needed that building. And from there, it just went on and on and on. That was the beginning of the no money method. Once I saw how I did that one, I said, okay, now there's no stopping me. And that was the one that did it.
Love it. So let's talk about raising private capital, because that's something, a lot of investors hear, but they
Yeah.
don't, like you're saying, they have that nervousness. They're not sure where to get started. So when you work with people and they're at the stage of, with creative financing or choices of raising private capital, what do you usually recommend if somebody first starts thinking about it? What do they need to do to get started?
Well, the first thing, you have to get around people with money. You really do. And so, I did a video a while back, and it was like, if I was starting at zero today, what would be the first steps I did to get me right back where I am today? And three of those steps were getting around people for what you need. The first step was getting into real estate groups. Join your local real estate investor associations, any different bigger pockets, anything that's local for you. Get involved in there. Introduce yourself. Tell people, hey, I'm new to this. This is what I'm looking for. Or this is what I'm interested in. And be very active. The next thing you need to do is, you went to private money. So let's jump to the private money. Start going to groups where there's professionals, there's people working, Chamber of Commerce's, Rotary groups, business meetups, any of those, and start interacting with people. Tell people who you are, what you're doing, because there's a lot of people who have capital that want to invest in real estate. They don't have the time. They're not able to be in real estate. When I found the one person out of the first three that I sent a message to, when we sat and talked, they said, we want to be in real estate. We just don't want to be in real estate. They were too busy. They're running their businesses. And me, I want to be in real estate. I just didn't have the capital to be in it. And so it was a great little group. And that's what you need to do. You just need to get out there, and you got to start introducing yourself. If nobody knows who you are or what you're trying to do if you don't tell them. And so you
Right.
need to get out, you need to speak, you need to be active in groups. And eventually you're going to find some people, or you'll know some people that you could send those first texts out like I did.
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I know I was active in my local Rotary in the past, and people in Rotary love to support other people in Rotary. They support their businesses. They would love to do that. And so, if somebody's listening, if you're a listener and these limiting beliefs are coming in your head and you're like, oh, no, that wouldn't work. He's just saying that. I'm going to tell you that I saw that happen in Rotary myself with people supporting other members.
Well, people with money, they have to do something with it. Nobody just going to keeps all their money just sitting in the bank and getting the least amount of return possible. That just doesn't happen. And so they have to do something. So really what it comes down to, getting out there, getting active, getting where you're finding the real estate deals and what's going on. You find wholesale deals, different things like that. That's the first one. Getting around people with money. The third step after that, and this is where I help people, is you have to be able to tailor a pitch. You have to be able to learn how to make it attractive, because people want to make money. If the deal
Right.
is right, there's no shortage of money. So you have to learn how to present the deal to someone that it's attractive for everybody involved.
Right. And that's what I was going to ask you about next. How do you structure these conversations with potential capital partners so that they feel confident saying yes?
Yeah, well, with real estate, it's nice because you always have the asset that helps. So that helps. If you're just asking somebody, hey, you want to invest in my startup ideal for some business? Well, it's a little more risky because there may not be anything. There may not be a
Right.
business when this is over, but there is always real estate when it's over. So you have that. And, it takes some due diligence on your part for sure. When I did that first building, I looked at the rents that it was bringing in. I knew the market. I knew where the rents could go to. I requested what's called the rent roll. So I got all the information. And I saw where it's at. I saw where it could go. I put all of that in my presentation. So you say, hey, this is a cash producing asset. This is what it's going to produce from the day we acquire it. This is where I'm going to get it up to. And so you just have to lay your presentation out so well that they look and they say, okay, so our money is backed by this asset. Yes, if you buy it outright, great, your first position. If there's other lenders, your second or whatever, but they see they're backed by the asset and they see it's cash producing. And then after that, you have to make their reward worth their risk. And so,
Exactly.
those are the items that you have to show someone. And then you have to go with confidence. If you don't believe in yourself, no one else is going to. So you have
Right.
to come very confidently and you show your confidence by how much work you put into it in advance. Show what you've covered. Have all your angles covered. Show this. And when they look at it, they were like, wow, okay. And so that's how you come correct.
Love that. Love it. Now let's pivot a little bit because we've talked a lot about I think strategy and mindset. I also like to make sure our listeners walk away with something really tangible like tools. So I'm wondering, let's talk about tech. We've covered a
Okay.
lot here, but if you're working with some investors, are there any like top tech tools that you recommend for your coaching clients or anything like that to help them with any part of this investing deal?
I mean, if you're not using AI today, you're going to get left behind. That's for sure. AI is helping in so many different ways and everything. And, the gentleman that I mentioned earlier about his triplex. He, again, was low income, didn't really have a lot of savings at the time. So, attorneys can get costly. He said, I've never looked at a contract before. And I said, okay, well, first of all, let's put this out there. Never rely on AI for anything legal, replacing an attorney, anything like that. Time contracts get involved, make sure you cover, all your bases and don't expect AI to cover your legal issues. But it's a beginning point. And I told him, take your
Mhm.
contract, throw it into AI, tell AI to look at it from the buyer's perspective. Is it out of balance? Is there anything that you should, that can be pointed out that you need to look at and address and discuss before you ever get it to the attorney? And so,
Right.
I use AI for everything. You can put AI, if you're looking at a property, you can put all the variables, everything in AI, run it by it, have AI tell you the deal, and it'll even help you structure to investors and stuff like that. So AI I use so much, so I think that's the biggest and best that I could advise.
I love it. I agree. ChatGPT and me we're best friends. So
Yeah.
you speak in
Yeah.
my language. Well, we're getting to the end here. So I'd like to kind of maybe get a little more philosophical. You frame wealth as more than money. I know it's been transformational and changing your life, your opportunities, those of your loved ones. I'm curious, what does real wealth mean to you personally today, here, as we go into 2026?
I mean, the biggest one you'll hear from everyone is it gives you your time. And, I have a story that when I was working, I was a single parent. My son and I moved out to California and we didn't have any family out there. We didn't know anyone out there. And he was part of a school activity, a play or something. And he rehearsed for it and it was really important to him. And he really wanted me there. And if I wasn't there, nobody was going to be there for him. I went to my boss and I asked if I could have the time off to be at the school play. And I was told, no, I would lose my job if I wasn't there at work. And so I was faced with being there with my son, which was important to him, or, and losing my job, or, not being and keeping my job. And I had to keep my job. I mean, that's a realistic part of life. And so I wasn't there. And that, never will happen again. And,
Right.
stuff like that. Somebody, maybe you have a family member that's ill or something. And, can you miss work to actually go be there with you when you need? So, first, that's the first thing you get. Once you get to where you have financial freedom, you're able to do what you want, when you want, or when you need. And the next
Mhm.
thing after that is the impact that you have on other people's lives. And that's what it becomes really rewarding. And the gentleman I mentioned earlier about the triplex, you know, before he did that, there was a part in his life where I know he probably had written off any home ownership because he's from the same area I'm from. And where
Right.
we're from, we don't know people who own homes and have property. I would assume that he had written off property ownership in his life. And
Mhm.
now he owns a cash producing property, looking at his second property, and now that's what he's teaching to his children. And so
Yeah.
it's going beyond him. That's what's amazing about it. The impact that you have on people's lives and even their children and things like that. So to me, those are the most important parts of it.
I could not agree more. I love both of those answers, and they're definitely things that keep me motivated, even when the times can be challenging with real estate investing. So, thank you for sharing that and for sharing your personal story. I appreciate you putting that out there. David, if people would like to connect with you further, if they'd like to learn more about this no money method, what's the best way for them to reach out?
Well, I go by the No Money Millionaire. So you can Google No Money Millionaire and you'll find me. But I also, right now, to any of your listeners, I have a book called The No Money Millionaire: How to Build Wealth Through Real Estate Without Using a Dime of Your Own Money. And that's available right now on my website as a free download, nomoneymillionaire.com. So, we've mentioned already that I know a lot of people are, in tight positions, money's tight, maybe living paycheck to paycheck. And I don't want them to miss this resource. I've put everything I do in here, real deals, everything I do. So here's such a valuable resource. And I don't want them to have to make a decision to, spend the money on it or not. You can get it right now. It's available for free. NoMoneyMillionaire.com. There's no reason not to get it.
Love that. And that's the perfect place for us to wrap up. If you are driving or listening this as you're at the gym, of course, the link is in the show notes or the description below so you can grab it. And then what I would challenge you to do, your first good deed of 2026, is take this podcast episode and send it to a friend who could benefit from that book. Say, hey, take a listen. If it's got some great wisdom here, I think we could really change the trajectory of our lives by implementing this. And he's even got a free book. So listeners, go share this with somebody who could benefit from it today and go get that book and then let them know what you thought. Let them know and reach out and take it from there. And thank you guys for listening to another episode of the Freedom Blueprint. Join me again next week. And thank you, David, for sharing all this wisdom with us.
Thank you very much. Thanks for giving the platform. And it's been a great time. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.